Today's episode of the Mind Sculptors podcast is sponsored by TCG Player, your source for all your trading card game needs. Use our link in the description the next time you get your cards to help support the show. Today's episode is also made possible by our Patreon subscribers. If you want to support the show directly, head over to patreon.com/the Mind Sculptors and you can become part of the SCULPTY family today. Or if you don't want to do any of that, leave a like and comment on YouTube or a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts as an offering to Algorithm Jesus.
So this morning, I went and got coffee with my wife and my wife. And so we went to a local coffee shop and I ordered a caramel vanilla latte, which is super delicious. It's just that right amount of sweetness, you know what I mean? And I get the latte back, and I don't know that there was caramel or vanilla. I think they just put milk and coffee together.
Good. Yes, really.
Because I
really launching some of the flavors.
Yeah, I took a drink of it and I was like, that's pretty bitter. And Cassidy was like, well, you don't love like coffee. So she was like, let me try it. And she goes, no, I don't think they put any of the flavoring you asked in.
Cool. And of course, you being the perfectly good Midwesterner, you did not go back and get what you wanted.
No, I didn't.
Right?
No, I just was just like, well, I guess this is what it is.
Yeah. Acceptable resignation. Yeah.
Listen, when the world beats you down so much, sometimes you just accept what things are.
All right, fair enough.
I guess this is what I'm having.
It was one of those days.
All right, cool. Do be that way sometimes. We did go and immediately go get cookies afterwards, so it was kind of I had to get some sweetness, but and I don't hate, and this is the thing, is I don't hate lattes. I like lattes on their own, like without the flavoring. I just wasn't expecting it to not have caramel and vanilla in it. So when I took my first drink, I was like, that's wrong.
Yeah. You know what else is wrong?
There's a lot of shit.
I was really expecting you to have more of like a fear reaction of me, like, oh God, what is he possibly gonna get? You're just kind of like, you were like, yeah, I'm ready for it.
This is the element where I'm in, where it's just the tacit resonate, or I'm like resigned to the fact that it is what it is, if that makes sense.
Sure.
I'm just kind of like accepting of whatever it is. And what else is bad, Ian?
I didn't have anything. I was just trying to sort of get a reaction.
It's so funny. Sometimes we sit down and I come in and I'm like rolling, right? Like I've clearly been like moving and grooving and ready to, do sing a funk song, if so, or but
is that
well, the way my brain was thinking was moving and grooving and play that funky music,
and
white
singing,
boy,
and singing a funk song.
Yeah, that's where my brain went to.
Okay, but
it's very funny to me because some mornings and afternoons when we come in, I'm like on one and I'm ready to go, and you're a little bit more like yep. Yeah. And then there's days like today where I'm very awake. And
is that what we're calling you being very awake? Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
It's funny because if people have never seen you and I interact at like a con before, like one, nobody would have, not a whole lot of people outside of like you and Cassidy and like my close friends have like seen me when I'm just like
in the morning,
pre-caffeinated.
When you're in zombie mode.
And it's it's very funny because every time we're at cons, I'll just be sitting there and people will be like, "Is Cal okay?" And you're like, "Yeah, they're still drinking their coffee." It just
yeah. wait till the 1.5 monsters have digested into their system,
and they'll be a person.
yeah, exactly. We do share that true horrifying dependency on caffeine for sure.
It is so funny to think because like I was thinking about this the other day where I was just like, I can't think of a time in my life outside of like junior high, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or I guess like post junior high, where I did not require an amount of caffeine to start my day.
Yeah. It's very, very valid. I definitely have like tried to wean myself off. You know what it is? I thought, damn it, if I have to go on Survivor, I'm not going to be able to have caffeine, right? And that is a dream I am manifesting, but I'm not weaning myself off caffeine, which is a problem, obviously. But I like to feel alive. I feel like if I'm on an island, I feel alive enough as it is. You know what I mean?
Still think you will do better than what's the lady who was on the last season who just was allergic to a stiff breeze.
Oh, Liz.
Yeah, Liz.
Yeah.
Like
fucking Liz.
She's like, guys, I'm so hungry. I'm allergic. I haven't eaten anything. And it's like, well, you did go on a show that we are allergic to everything.
Yeah,
so
yeah. You did mention to strand yourself on a desert island by choice. Yeah. It seems
some of this feels like it's on you, but
yeah.
Oh my goodness. Welcome everybody to the Mind Sculptors. I think this is a bit more of a fun, upbeat vibe that we're starting the show off than last.
I think every fun vibe really helps when you stop in the middle of the intro to mention how much of a good vibe it is.
Well, okay, specifically compared to the like existential depression that we opened with last week.
Oh, I did forget about that. Yeah, we really started on a low note.
Yeah, we really opened the show with, well, everything's burning around us, and this week it's a little bit more goofy, funny.
We're a bunch of silly gentlemen.
We're some silly guys.
We're having a good time. Yeah. Let's stop bullshit.
Yeah, let's stop bullshit.
I mean, we're here. We're here to gather magic, and by that I mean this is a Magic the Gathering podcast. Welcome to the Mind Sculptors. I am once again taking over the introduction this week. This is a new bit. I don't know why I'm doing it. This is the Mind Sculptors. I am one of your hosts, Ian. Next to me is Callahan, our lovely super host. Yeah, I don't know. You do more hosts. You are more host than I am host. So therefore you are super host. And on today's episode, we're talking about a fever dream I had that we helped manifest into reality.
It turned out to not be a fever dream, actually. It was It was one of those things where this deck that we're talking about today, I got a call from you while I was like in the dentist, and I called you back afterwards, and you were like, I need you to make sure that I'm like not going nuts, that this is actually a thing.
And for some context, right? So like what we're going to be talking about today is a Najeela list that we have named Breakfast Warriors. I came up with the concept of this list because we had been sort of experimenting with, and by we I mean I had been sort of messing around with like, okay, what does it look like to have a deck that is optimized around having Nadu in the 99, right? And a shell that's sort of built around that, right? So the initial concept was like, okay, what's the most free Nadu enabler? And it felt like Lightning Greaves, right? Like Lightning Greaves is just one of those cards that comes in and it just goes, all right, cool, a bunch of free Nadu triggers, right? And then the other one is obviously Nomads in Core, right? So from there, looked at the Cephalid Breakfast package, which we can talk about in more detail later. And then I came up with, putting it all together in a 5-color list that makes a bunch of bodies for Nadu, and Najeela was born, right? So I jump into our group chat. I jump into our group chat with Phoenix and Cal, and I just start like throwing a list together. And meanwhile, this is like a day before Cowtown, and I'm like, oh my god, is this do I do this for Cowtown? I'm just
like, all right, like pump the brakes.
But it was one of those things where it was like my type of ADHD was like I had to get this idea onto paper, or else I was going to lose my mind. So I call and I'm like messaging Phoenix back and forth because, as you mentioned, you were at the dentist. And Phoenix is like, yeah, oh, these things work, and I've done a lot of Najeela work. Here's how we can do this thing. And I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I was like, are Phoenix and I on the same page about a crazy brew? And then I was like, wait, Cal, rein us in, rein us in. You were like, no, this actually makes sense. And I was like, oh shit, we're onto something.
When all three of us are in
Yeah.
agreement on like something makes sense, that doesn't happen very often. It's like it's usually like two of us agree on something, and it's just like, you know, there's usually one of us who's like, I don't know about this, and this was one of the few times where everybody was just like, nope, this seems like a thing. So yeah.
So there's this version that we're going to talk about today, and this is what I ended up bringing to the Independence Day 2K in Taunton, Massachusetts, over at King's Court Gaming. I ended up in 11th, and unfortunately, it was a top 10 cut, so that was a bit heartbreaking. I learned a lot of lessons from this tournament. I learned some play patterns that I was maybe relying on too much. My new version is called Breakfast Warriors 2, maybe Najeela sucks, right? And like that is definitely one of the lessons I learned a little bit while playing with this deck. And then we can kind of like talk about, you know, some of the how we got to version 2, which is like closer to version 1 than it may look, and then kind of go from there. But let's talk about V1, right? Where it all started, right? So I come to Cal and Jeremy with this shell, right? And I basically go like, hey, here's this raw idea for this deck, right? Here's I have no Najeela experience. Like, let me just throw a bunch of stuff in there. I think,
and like in for context, like
Najeela, right?
Jeremy and I have a buttload of Najeela experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was like super instrumental to like making the list take a step off the ground, right? So yeah, we can talk a little bit about like the stuff that is the main shell, right? Which is this package of Nadu, right? Cephalid Illusionist, Nomad's Encore, and Lightning Greaves, right? Like that's sort of the Nadu 99 package. For those who don't know, Nomad's Cephalid Illusionist is the Cephalid breakfast combo. So this just happens to just like the Nadu stuff works with the Cephalid breakfast combo, which works with the Najeela stuff, and like it's really nice to have that layering. Basically, the idea is Nomads can target anything for free, right? So with Nadu out, you get a bunch of Nadu triggers equal to the amount of creatures you have, and you can do that at instant speed. So it's obviously a very good combination with the two of them. But with Cephalid, Cephalid said whenever it's targeted, you mill 3, right? So basically a 2-card combo to mill your entire deck. We play a Dread Return the 99, which I know we were debating on for a considerable amount of time whether you actually wanted to get the Dread Return. I chose right before the tournament to put it in because in the testing, I was like, oh, there's so many Cephalid breakfast hands that I like really just want to jam pretty early on. And that ended up being a pretty decent choice too for the tournament.
Yeah. And like one of the things that I think is really important to like kind of hammer on here too, is we talked about this a little bit last week when we were talking about the Nadu deck in cEDH and how it is shockingly similar in how it plays and the like play patterns of it to its modern counterpart. And I think in a lot of ways, this is also the similar thing where it plays very similarly to the modern counterpart. I think like the entire general vibe of a Nadu style deck is pretty consistent across formats. And I think that's a pretty interesting thing. Where you know you're doing a thing and you know a lot of your pieces tend to it's kind of like asking you to play the most layered deck imaginable like just by how it is you know functions. And so you know like the way that I tend to build decks and you know the decks that I tend to really appreciate and play a lot of are layered decks, and I have a really an affinity for layered Najeela decks. And so this was a cool thing to get to work on. And one of the things that I think we kind of mentioned a little bit again last week, but we didn't really hammer home on it specifically around this one, is how Lightning Greaves is like absurdly free to play in this deck.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Lightning Grease is already a card that you are like, it's not quite a 99, a 99 option for Najeela decks,
Mhm.
but
Yeah.
it's usually a card that's like card 103 or 104. It's like a card that you're
Yeah,
like,
like it's really worth
yeah,
considering in a creature focused
yeah.
aggro deck, right?
And it generally doesn't make the cut, but it's a card that you don't mind if you
Yeah.
have it. And in
Hmm.
a deck like
Hmm.
this, you are actively like encouraged to play this protection piece
Yeah.
that is
Yeah.
also a haste enabler to
Right.
your cards. And so
Right.
again, this is part of why, I saw Cobblepot was talking about Nadu and the 99 of Kenrith, which
Mhm.
again, I don't see any issue with that. I think Nadu in the
Yeah.
99
Yeah.
is like quite frankly
Mhm.
busted in a lot
Yeah,
of
I
different
think so too.
places. Um, but I
Yeah, I like it in the Kenrith shells. The reason like we chose to hyper focus on this one in particular, right, was one, the body
mhm,
generation, right? Two, the ability to turn on deflecting swat and fierce guardianship very early on, right? That was a big sell for Najeela. And three, and this is something we'll talk about a little bit later, which is like as Cal sort of already alluded to, which is the layering.
yep.
The layering is huge, right? Um, Cal, do you want to define layering for those of us who weren't like boomers in
Yeah.
CEDH?
So when I'm talking about layering, what I am
Mhm.
talking about is all of your combos are like it's like a chain link effectively.
Mhm. Yeah,
You
exactly.
have I think a really great example of this is like Cephalid Illusionist and Nomad's Encore are a combo, but Cephalid
Yeah,
Illusionist and Nadu don't combo with each other, but
right.
Nomads and Nadu do. So you have these
Right, right.
pieces that like
Yeah.
cling together.
And not only that, right? Cephalids and Lightning Greaves are a
Right.
combo, and Lightning Greaves and Nadu are a
Right.
combo, right? So you're seeing how like this piece is good for this combo and this combo, and then they layer one on top of
Right.
the other on top of
And
the
and
other,
so
right?
the idea behind it is where, I think like a good comparison is like with the no bad cards Najeela lists, right? Like the idea
Correct.
behind a lot of those is that you're playing high card quality. And the individual cards that you're ripping off of your top deck are going to be on average better than your opponents. The idea behind
Mhm.
a layered deck is very similar. However, the difference is you're kind of accepting that your average card quality might not be as high as necessarily
Mhm.
everybody else's, but your internal consistency to put forth your game plan and for comboing or winning the
Yeah.
game is significantly higher because each individual
Right.
piece can link together with other pieces in a lot of
Yes.
different ways to a way that you're able to just kind of put things together on the
Mhm.
fly in a
Yeah.
way that lets you not really need to be like, okay, I need to get to specifically
Mhm.
ad nauseum, or I need to
Yeah.
specifically get this Najeela enabler, right? Like you are able
Yep.
to buy what's in your hand and what you are drawing, assemble a
Mhm.
win, because all of your
Yeah.
pieces just kind of go over top of each other in this
Yeah.
way.
And I think let's talk about step through, right? Because that is, I think, the perfect
Mhm.
illustration of like a card that just gains so much value in a deck like this, right? So step through, not traditionally played in 5 color decks
Yeah,
a lot, right?
and for what it's worth, I'm historically a hater of this card. I don't like
Yeah,
this
yeah,
card
yeah.
generally.
Right. But for this deck in particular, it is a you can basically ignore the front half. Yeah, it does have text, right? It bounce 2 creatures for 5 mana, right? It's pretty
Yeah.
bad. But specifically, it has that wizard cycling ability, right? So for 2 generic mana, you discard it from your hand. This is an uncounterable thing, right? So it's stifle or bust,
Mhm.
right?
Or op agent
And
and bust, right?
yeah, well
Yeah.
that too. Yeah, yeah. But we have 4 insane wizards in the deck, right? Which are the reason you play something like this, right? So number one being
Mhm.
Thoracle, yeah, right. Like the fastest Oracle, we're a Thoracle combo deck, makes sense, right? Number two, Cephalid Illusionist, right? That is absolutely one of our 2 combo
Yeah.
pieces we've talked about earlier, right? Uncounterable way to go grab Cephalid is pretty huge. We have Derevi, right? Derevi herself, which is a 1 card combo with our commander, as long as we have enough warriors and or mana, right? And then we
Generally
have
the
Nadu.
mana part. Gotta have the right
Yep.
lands. Um,
Yep. We have Nadu as well, right? Nadu happens to be a wizard, folks.
mhm.
It's real dang good, right? So if we're sitting there with the Lightning Greaves hands or a Nomad's Encore hand, boom, we get
Mhm.
there. And then if our other wizards aren't going well, we have Spellseeker, right? That's a perfect way to make sure we have a bunch of
Or
this stuff going. And
or I think a even better example is if you already have Thoracle in hand and you need to go grab
yeah,
Tainted Pact or Demonic
yeah,
Consultation,
yep,
and the card that you have in hand is a step through, well, you can end
yep,
step, go grab a Spellseeker, put it in your hand,
yep.
Spellseeker on your next turn, and go grab the piece you need to win the game there.
hmm And what's nice too is like if something happens to Derevi, Spellseeker can always go grab Neoform, which then converts it immediately to a
Yeah.
hireling as well, right? So like that's just a line you kind of have available to you at all times, which is really
Yeah.
nice. Yeah, definitely a big fan of
Yeah.
that in particular.
And
So I think like what you'll notice here, and this one of the things that I did make adjustments to kind of moving forward with the list is that it's a little heavy on 3-drops,
mhm.
right? And Cal, do you want to switch over to the comparison
Yeah.
between the two lists now and then? So one thing I did do in the most recent changes from that tournament is I basically found like when the Nadu plan is working, you're actually a lot closer to a storm deck,
Mhm.
right? So what I did was cut a bit of the chaff. I'm sort of a historically lover of Archivist Dogma. I don't hate it here by any means. It's just like the one game I had Archivist, it was also a game I'd already jammed an Oppo into,
Mhm.
and then the pieces that are like good Najeela value, as you know, the name indicates, right? Maybe Najeela sucks. It meant that like a lot of those Ajanis and Chatterfangs and stuff like that, they just felt super out of
Mhm.
place, right? Like I'll keep the one cards with Najeela, right? Like the Derevi itself is like obviously
Right.
dumb, right? And Hireling is the same way, but the stuff that really relies on that part of the game plan got sort of the axe, right? So you're definitely gonna hear me going through this being like, all right, and then you know these are some of the cards that got kind of cut a little bit along the way. As you mentioned, you might see we had LED and Brain Freeze. We're not in version 1. The original concept was that we would just use the Breakfast combo as ways to get that going, but I definitely found during the tournament that there would be times where I couldn't go for the breach line and the extra 3
Mhm.
mana. Whereas if I had just been able to be like breach and then fire off a brain freeze and hope I had an LED or a lotus petal, it would have been much more
Right.
effective.
And
And
to be
obviously the
clear, I
intuition
don't
piles
know
much
that
worse.
necessarily you need the brain freezer
Yeah.
LED. I think it
Yeah.
eases some of the tensions you might find, especially if you're used to playing traditional breach lines. I think
Yeah.
that because one of the things that playing, because one of the concepts behind not playing these is that effectively Cephalid Illusionist and Nomads
Nomads.
are
Yeah.
effectively
Right.
LED
Right.
brain
Yeah.
freeze. And so like you don't necessarily need to have LED and brain freeze. And I think
Yeah.
that using those in that way requires you to kind of rewire your brain in a way that I don't know that like
Mhm.
it plays on an axis that I don't think we're really used to playing. As I think
And
that,
while I do agree with that as a concept too, right? Like, and that's why originally, like, I went to the tournament without the two
mhm.
of them, right? And it is nice to have 2 slots that are not filled by those
Yeah,
cards, right? Like, they're not good cards. But the issue I was finding was that like the breach lines were just less
yeah,
effective because the way those cards work with each other is very powerful and
yeah.
very natural, right? Adding mnemonic betrayal also just adds a little bit of that speed to it, and obviously brain freeze and LED and um,
Firewall.
Lion's Eye Diamond and Mnemonic Betrayal all have an innate amount of synergy together. I know this is the one point of disagreement that Cal and I have specifically about this deck is that Cal's a meme bet
Well,
hater,
I don't
but
know that I'm a hater so much as it is
yeah,
that for me, meme bet is, and this is kind of a like fundamental like disagreement that I tend to have with like the general CEDH community writ large is
yeah,
I tend to hedge my deck building on people either just being stupid at like any point in the, whether it's the deck building process or the gameplay, is I try not to play cards that assume my opponents are playing optimally at any point in the deck building process, whether it's at the deck building process or it's at the gameplay process, any of those. And Mnemonic Betrayal is one of those cards where if you sit down at a table and you're playing against a bunch of people who I know built their decks like sane people, I would assume that it will work pretty well and be very effective. However, I've like played, and this is one of the things I said in our group chat is I have played in a lot of environments where people don't build optimally, and in fact build pretty stupidly. Uh, and so my internal instinct is to hedge on cards that don't rely on my opponent's, being
Mhm.
competent. And
Yeah.
and that being said, I think like Mnemonic Betrayal is a perfectly fine card. It's just a card that I
Mhm.
personally don't like to play, specifically because of the fact that of that fact where I try to hedge
Mhm.
I try to control as many of the variables as I can internally instead of having
Makes sense.
my variables be dependent on my opponents.
Yeah, I don't know that I necessarily agree with that, especially given the quality of CDH players nowadays at these tournaments. But yeah,
Yeah,
your opinion's valid.
it's just that's just and again, like I'm not saying everybody should do that. I'm just saying like when I take a deck like I think the swaps you made are perfectly valid, but when I play this deck, it's almost certainly going to be Archivist over Mean Bet like 90% of the time
Mhm.
because it's a card that I would rather have. But I,
Sure.
I think that playing Mean Bet is perfectly defensible and perfectly fine.
Yeah.
Um,
And yeah, there were also a couple times I found I wanted Final Fortune, just
yeah.
like not really like super crazy examples, but like obviously Najeela is one of those decks where like you sometimes just want to jam another turn with Derevi, right? Or this with Nadu too, right? Like if you have the Nadu Grease package, being able to be like, all right, cool, 2 mana, make sure that I get to untap here and then like get another 8 Nadu triggers is like that guarantees the game. Because once again, you got to treat the Nadu stuff like Storm,
Mhm,
right? Like it really does feel like sort of like a weird non-deterministic Storm a little bit.
mhm.
And that's one of the things I'm like really trying to optimize with this version of the list with these adjustments is like trying to get it so that as soon as I start casting multiple spells that I can just very succinctly be like, all right, cool, crack into a breach line or just like jam a Final Fortune, go for another turn, rip 8 or 9 cards, go for a
Right.
win, like make it nice and clean. Obviously it lowers the individual card quality, but increases the synergy a significant amount. And that was like the biggest problem I was finding with the list was the
Yeah.
speed, right? Like there were times when I was like, if I was just like a little bit faster, I would have this game in the
Yeah.
bag, right? Now there are other times where I'm like, and don't get me wrong, like I ended the day at 11 points, right? A 5 rounder. I went 2 wins, 2 losses, and a draw. Like super happy with
Yeah.
the deck. But there's some subtle optimizations that I feel like,
Could push you over the edge.
spoiler alert, I'm going to play it this weekend as well. And so like these changes pushed it a little bit faster to me. I still think it can probably get pushed even more so,
Mhm.
right? But you got to mess around with the numbers to be able to figure out
Yeah.
where those changes can be made,
One
right?
one change that I am not confident on, but is a
Yeah.
change that I will probably test is the addition of Springheart and Tucko. Just because of the fact that that
Mm.
card with Nadu does kind of just win the game. Uh,
I just don't think you need it,
I
right?
don't
Is
disagree, but it's just one of those
yeah,
cards where I just it's a card that's like persistent in my brain, if that makes sense. Where it's just like
sure.
it just feels so good, right? And so it's like I don't know
Yeah.
that you need it. I think that's probably like very accurate and very true. But there's a part of my brain that's just like, but maybe. And
Yeah, and I think there's even a version of this deck that is like even less so on the Najeela plan, and even more so just like Turbo Nadu,
mhm,
right? Where I think like the version now has a little bit of a cleaner like once again that nice slice of
yeah,
layering is just like one on top of the
mhm.
other on top of the other, right? As opposed to just being like, all right, if we lose Nadu, we don't play the
Yeah,
game. You know what I mean?
and I think that is where I prefer to be. Like, and you and I both kind of prefer that generally. Is like
Yeah.
if Nadu gets removed, and this is what's nice about this deck, right? Is if Nadu gets
Mhm.
removed, and I think this is the reason not to play Springheart for what it's worth, is because if
Yeah.
Nadu gets removed, the rest of your pieces that are part of that package are just like okay,
Yeah.
uh, and,
Right. Right.
and just keep on going,
Nice.
and so
Yeah.
that's like kind of the one thing that I would say about that is I think that is a
Mhm.
reason not to play Springheart is because of the fact that you have like all these other pieces that really just kind of continue working if Nadu goes away. Like there's no
Mhm.
card in this deck that I can think of where I'm like, man, if they remove Nadu, it just stops working. Like there is just none of the cards here do that.
Yeah.
And I think that's mostly what I really like about this particular style is,
Yeah.
you aren't reliant on, you know, a singular or, multiple cards that if they go away, you're just like, damn, like if any number of these could get removed and you could
Yeah.
still win the game, and it's perfectly fine. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know,
The other cards that are like kind of on the bubble for me, Facebreaker is one of them. I really like Facebreaker,
mhm.
and the curve with Najeela makes me feel like the Najeela curve isn't quite as bad.
Yeah,
Like it makes Najeela curve better, in my
yeah.
opinion. And there were definitely times where I would be like, all right, like and I think this can't be underestimated, and probably will be underestimated when people perceive this deck, but like the ability to play a Facebreaker and it be not as scary as a Samet or a Grim Hireling or a Derevi, and just be like a little bit of value that's also a warrior, that's also making sure you connect with every player, right? Like the combination of all of these like checkmark factors, right? Of it being good at grinding, make me feel more comfortable with it as a card.
So
There was
historically,
definitely
I've
times.
really disliked this card in Najeela
Yeah.
because it's a big mana investment that doesn't immediately combo with uh, Najeela. You
Yes.
never, generally speaking, want to crack the treasures for anything other than activations, because it's just like you don't really want to exile stuff off the top. However, there is a card that has come out recently that has made me kind of rethink this rationale, and that's Thonian Nightmare,
Mhm.
because it gives you an outlet for those
Yeah.
treasures to give you another piece of layering to
Mhm.
win the game. And so I'm less of a face breaker hater because of Thonian Nightmare. However,
Yeah.
generally speaking, I think PFB is a pretty medium to bad
Yeah.
Najeela card. That just
Mhm.
it sits in an awkward part of the curve.
Yep.
Um, it kind of has this awkward tension with your game plan. I think it works a little bit better here because you're already kind of doing the like Nadu flips stuff. So like the
Mhm.
activation portion of it is like less of a hindrance in this.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
generally speaking, I'm not a fan of it, and it's probably one of the cards that I would feel the most comfortable cutting out of this new version,
Yeah.
just
It
because
it
of
and Spellseeker are definitely like the ones that are on the bubble for me. Like I literally took Spellseeker out, put it back in, took it out, put it back in, like in my testing with it, right?
Mhm.
That one's like, but now that we have Final Fortune and Tainted Pact and Demonic Consultation and Step Through doesn't hurt, right? Like all those things. And it's so funny. Step Through feels like one of those cards. It's like, this is obviously the cut here, right?
Yeah.
But legitimately, every time I like rip a hand open with this thing and Step Throughs in there, I'm like, this just fixes the hand. Like it
It
just
just
gets me
wins
the
the
thing that
game.
I need.
Okay, well, fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, I
Yeah.
totally get that. And like one of the things with
Yeah.
Spellseeker too that I think is worth noting is that like Spellseeker opens you up to a lot of lines that, while they are slow, they are really solid and harder to interact with than I think most people are really willing to like admit. You
Yeah.
have obviously we mentioned this earlier, you have that Neoform line that I think is incredibly solid. And
Yeah. It's
I,
card
I I
efficient for
think
sure.
I think Neoform is a card that is in the deck because Spellseeker is in the deck. Um,
Yeah.
it's kind
They
of
they
in
are
my
packaged
opinion. Yeah,
together.
it's one of those things
Yeah.
where if you cut Spellseeker, you cut Neoform, and if
I
you
agree.
cut Neoform, you probably are cutting Spellseeker. Just
Which
because,
I'm like, as I mentioned, these two are the ones that like, because once again, hyperfixating on this deck. I have a tournament this weekend about
yeah.
it, so those are the two that I'm probably on the bubble with the
My
most. Yeah.
biggest thing that I really like about both of them is I think when you are on this 5 color overlapping soup, you do again have another layer here where you open with, a dork, a land, and you have Thassa's Oracle in your hand, and or you don't have Thassa's Oracle in your hand, but you have DC in your hand. You just neoform the dork away and go get a Thassa's Oracle and you just win the game, which sounds like it's pretty niche, but as somebody who has played an awful lot with Neoform and Thassa's Oracle, that happens a lot more than I'm comfortable to admit.
Yeah.
It's just a really solid piece there, and like the layering of that on top of this that also gets you your Grim Hireling. And again, it's one of those things where I think when you evaluate things, this is kind of what I was going back to with the like no bad cards thing, right? Where is if you look at things on an individual card basis, you're going to be like, well, why are you playing Nomads on Core? That's not a very good card. But when you look at Nomads on Core or Step Through is a better example of a card that when you individually look at it, you know, it looks pretty bad. But then when you evaluate it within the context of the deck, oh, this card's incredible. This card's insane. And so that's one of the things where I think like and I think this is just kind of like a general thing with like card evaluation is I think like card value is not like you can't in a deck, like build a deck and then evaluate cards individually. You have to be able to evaluate those cards within the context of what you're playing.
Oh, for
and
sure.
I think that's a thing that doesn't necessarily happen most of the time, but
I think, you know, and this is like some people may ask, like, why play this over something like NBC, right? And I can't claim that this is like the best thing to be doing in Najeela, blah, 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 right? But one thing I will say in its favor is that, like, yeah, I do agree that like the Najeela plan is not doing great right now, period, right? Like the just jam it and have a Nas and like all that stuff, it's just not working in the current metagame, right? And what I think this version does is it adapts to a metagame where Najeela is not as effective, much better than traditional Najeela or NBC Najeela, right? So that is there too, right? But also considering the fact that like this is just a separate angle of attack, and it makes those times when like I've played NBC before, right? Like during pickup games and like stuff like that, and always every single time what happens is I end up in a scenario where I'm like, cool, I have a tutor for Derevi in hand, and I have a Culling the Week, and I have a Culling Ritual, but no payoff for any of those. And then I have like some sort of creature thing for Najeela, and then like maybe a Thoracle. And it's like, here's all of these disparate plans, right? That don't really have that level of like, okay, but this helps this, right? Whereas this version of the deck, it's you're less likely to run into that scenario. Now, if that's a risk you're willing to take for the speed of the deck, then jam it, right? Like that's 100% a different conversation, right? But the reason for this build is like you want that consistency that NBC or traditional Najeela are just kind of lacking in the current metagame, right?
And that's one of the things that I think has been a common criticism we have had on this channel of NBC Najeela is that there's that internal tension between the Najeela game plan and the Nas game plan, right? You know, the Nas game plan is like, here's a bunch of black mana generation, boy, and like here's a bunch of go burst stuff that doesn't really necessarily contribute to the Najeela plan in a meaningful way. And the Najeela plan pretty much only generates like a 1/1 to be a thing that you sack to your Culling the Week and be destroyed by Culling Ritual, and like they don't add, those two strategies don't add to each other. They are just uniquely good strategies on their own that are in the same deck but don't overlap with each other. And this is kind of the idea of I'm okay making the sacrifice of I don't get, you know, this uniquely powerful card. What I do get, honestly, here's what it is. It's Moneyball is what it is, you know, if you're familiar with Moneyball, in that movie, in that book about the Oakland A's, where they just didn't have like a lot of money to spend on like big name players, but you know, they tried to get like, we are going to get 3 players who average, who can basically make up that difference. And so we're going to go with the averages and these sorts of things. And so it was this whole idea of playing things on the analytics side of things. And this is definitely a much more like Moneyball approach to building a Najeela deck of we're looking at things and how they contribute to each other and how they like kind of contribute to each other in a meaningful way. And while like, you know, our top end capability might not be as high, right? On the speed factor, we are making up that difference through the contribution of XYZ, you know, and all these different things. And so I think that's the way that I would describe this is, you know, this is like,
I have not seen that movie, and I will say, unlike your usual metaphors, I followed along, so I'm really proud of you.
I mean, Moneyball is one of those things I think most people are at least like passively familiar with the concept, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is really what this is God damn it, we're gonna have a Moneyball thumbnail. I hate it.
No.
But yeah, like I think that is the sales pitch I would give to this is, you know, if that sounds appealing to you as that Moneyball approach, that's what I would say this version of Najeela is.
So like I also want to take a second to talk about some like other packages we've sort of like looked at or messed around with, right? Post tournament, I like did a little bit of like, okay, what if we took a couple cards out for a dark ritual into a Nas type of thing? It wasn't bad per se, but it wasn't anything that like really blew me away, right? Getting Dark Ritual and culling and stuff like that for both Beseech the Mirror and Adnaz definitely helped, but it was so, once again, antithetical to like everything else we've sort of looked at for this deck that I was like, I feel like one of the benefits of this deck is, and this goes back to like the people who try to put Breach in Sisay, right? It's like one of the big benefits of Sisay is that you don't get hated out on certain axes, right? Your opponent's swan songs are almost never online, like stuff like that, right? And then when we pivot over to like Dark Ritual deck, right, we start to fall into all the problems of the versions that we are trying to separate this deck from, right? As opposed to, you know, Nadu Storm, which is like, yeah, sometimes you just need to resolve a Lightning Greaves or a Nadu, and suddenly you're like, okay, well, now I'm like 8 cards deep into a pile, and it's like, yeah, they can interact with me here, but it's not like I had to resolve one card to make that happen, and the one card I did resolve was a creature, so it's like a lot harder to actually mess with on the stack, right? And so I'm not trying to really open myself up to stuff that we already sort of get to skirt around, you know? One change I am considering is originally, and this is another one, it was that the pitch was, hey, Cutzel just works way better with Najeela because of curve and all of that consideration, right? As we move hypothetically farther away from the Najeela plan, Cutzel does look a little bit worse. The counter argument to that still is that we are a Summoner's Pact in a Green Sun Zenith deck, right? And having 2 more tutors for our Grand Abolisher effect.
I think that's like ultimately the reason to stay on it. I think the other thing too that I think is worth noting here is this is just like easier to cast than Grand Abolisher in this style of deck. One of the
honestly true.
One of the biggest hurdles to even a card like Ranger Captain is that in Najeela decks, it's really hard to make double white. Like it is, your mana base is configured to give you one of each color, right? And anytime your deck asks you to make double colors that are your off colors, because you're kind of this like soul tie or like this soul tie base deck ultimately, and you kind of splash white and you splash red. And so anytime your deck kind of asks you to be like, hey, I need 2 white, you're like, what do you mean you need 2 white? And so like in Ranger Captain kind of gets in because it's a shooter for a combo piece and it's also a thing. And so you can kind of justify it a little bit more than Grand Abolisher. I still think there's a reasonable argument for Grand Abolisher, but I think when we're on cards like, you know, Green Sun Zenith and Summoner's Pact, it makes your Cutzel just that much better.
I do find it funny that this deck is like, it really is Simic +3, right? Like it is like if you look down the color split, it is right now 29% blue, 22% green, and then 17 black, 17 red, 14
Yep.
white, right? Like, so it's really just like a very simic deck that also has like little kisses of other
Yeah.
stuff.
And that's just kind of what Nadu is in general, right? Like
Yeah.
Nadu
Yeah.
is
Simic, right?
a Simic based deck, and you're just
Yeah.
kind of adding cards around it that, you know
Yeah.
what? Honestly, we were talking about this like a while ago. People are like, what does green need to do to be really good? And this feels like a thing that makes green really relevant, because if you look at
Yeah.
this deck, you're like, man, some of the best cards in this deck are green, you know?
Yep.
And it's
Yeah.
just it's very fun to play a deck like this that just feels
Mhm.
like it is playing on a whole other axis than what
Yeah.
most people
Yeah.
are really prepared
It's
for.
weird, right? In the best
Yeah.
way. Yeah, no, I definitely find that like I really enjoy that like part of the deck. Like my favorite part of the deck is absolutely doing the untap Nadu Storm part, right? Because like it is, you get to literally just go like, all right, cool, I'm just gonna untap and then flip and flip and flip and flip and flip and flip and flip. Like there is a world where we look into a Shuka for the deck,
Mhm.
right? Like not even like unironically, like it just maybe to increase the redundancy of that type of
Yeah.
plan. I think there's a lot of I mean, there's so much space to explore.
Yeah,
in this
there's
deck,
like
truly.
cards that you can add that I think are pretty solid additions. You know, like I think Sylvan Safekeeper is an option, because Sylvan Safekeeper with Nadu plans are stupid. The
Honestly, I was thinking about Spellscape, but that just makes way more
Yeah,
sense.
I
Huh.
think the only
Yeah.
downside with Sylvan Safekeeper is that it makes some of the Najeela stuff a little bit harder. But if we're kind of accepting that the Najeela wins happen off Derevi and Grim Hireling,
Yeah.
then whatever, right? Like it just is what
Yeah.
it is.
And also going into that light, we're on 28 lands right now. I think one of the changes that I will end up making before I go to Colorado is finding a thing to cut for a land.
Yeah, I was also thinking
Given the fact because we're at 28 lands, right? Nadu plan gets infinitely better the more lands you have, as many people know. That deck has what 32
like
to
32,
34
I
lands
think.
on average. Yeah. But depending on the
Yeah,
pilot,
right.
right? But like 32 to 34 lands on most of those decks, right? And there's definitely been a lot of mulligans where I'm like, fuck, I'm down one land. Like the deck is so good. There's a lot of lands that can go in there too, which is the nice part, right? Like one of the ones I'm definitely looking at is the Talon Gates of Madara. Just being able to like, Nadu trigger flip over a removal spell is kind of hot. I'm not
Yeah.
gonna lie. I definitely don't hate that. And the fact that, there are times where you just hold it in your hand and it basically acts like a bad Odawara, but it's an Odawara that then ramps you. So it's not a bad Odawara. It works decently with Derevi, right? In the sense that it can filter your colors. So I think there's definitely some stuff there with that card as well. It's tough because like you want this deck to be very proactive, right? But like you also need to have like it's like you need to have your cake and eat it too, right? Like it's proactive, but you still need creatures to trigger Nadu, and you still need lands to flip over the top.
One of the
Nadu,
things that
and
I
also
think
just
is
to make your
really
land drops from Najeela.
a good way of it is very adaptive, where it is very good at matching the table. Where if you sit down at a table and there's like 2 Rog Size and a Timnacrom, you're like, bet, all right, that I know exactly how I need to play this game. And if you sit down and there's a Tivit and there's, a Timnacrom and there's, like another control-y deck, you're just like, bet, I know how I have to play this game. And and none of that requires you to like change your internal game plan in such a way that you are playing significantly differently, which I think is like notable.
Yeah, no, I'm all about it. I generally think this is like a really I don't know, it's a really cool deck. It's a really unique deck. I'm very happy with it. I think like I haven't been obsessed about a deck like this in a really long time, right? Like it feels I don't know, it just feels so different than anything else that exists currently, right? And like, yeah, I hope Nadu dodges the the ban that everyone's hoping.
I think it's
for,
going to be
but,
around for a year. I said that last year, but I think that if their banning history is any indication, I think they will give it a year before they do anything.
Yeah,
because they tend to
if
not
they're gonna do anything.
act very quickly.
But Point being, this is so I do have a history in CEDH of having these weird like fever dream basically deck ideas, right? And like so far they've been pretty solid, right? Like just like my, wake up in the middle of the night covered in sweat, like, oh God, this has gotta, like, this is the deck, right? And this is one of those lists, right? I had that with my completely 180 Derevi list. I had it with Atali. I've had it in 60 card back when I used to do that for fun. Like just weird decks that I'm just like, okay, this is a thing. And I get like very obsessed about it because I know it works, right? And this is the list that's done that most recently, and which is why I was like, I ran to you in Phoenix in a sweat, and I was like, please tell me I'm not crazy here, right? Like
I'm crazy. I need somebody to slap me because I
yeah, exactly. But no, I really enjoy the play patterns of the deck. Like there's a game that I had no business winning because there was a Rog Thras player who like popped off turn one. I think they got Ancient Tomb, Mox Diamond, played played Relic of Legends, used that mana to play Rograk, and used that mana to play Thrasios. Followed up with a Kinnan next turn. First flip was Natali or something like nonsense like that. Fully just popped the hell off.
Okay.
Yeah. And they were just like one mana short from popping off. We like kept them at bay. There's a Rakdos player who like almost went for it, kept it at bay, and I untapped, and all I had on my board was one land. Ignoble, Noble, Birds of Paradise, Lightning Greaves. That's all I had. But I had drawn a couple cards off of Mystic Remore, and I was like, oh my God, if I get a land, like I'll make something happen. Last card I hit, I had a Green Sun in hand, but last card I hit was Nadu itself, right? And I was like, all right.
I guess we're doing this.
Use 3 of the 4 available mana. Oh no, I think I have actually hit a land drop. So I played my land for turn, and I was like, okay, 3 of my 5 mana, play the Nadu. And then just move the boots, trigger 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And it just like, I proceeded to end that game with like 15 mana on board and presenting a Chthonian loop. I was like, this is
stupid.
Everything.
Yeah.
Like, this is exactly what I want to be doing when playing Magic the Gathering. And I was like, so this is, yeah. So I'm in. I'm in on the Nadu deck. I'm in on the spice. I'm in on the 5-color Najeela, the Nadu nonsense. Yep. Like, it's so much fun to play when it works, right?
Well, and that's the thing is I think it is a deck that's very close to just being like, yeah, that's good. And it just like every now and again we stumble upon something where we're just like, yep, that does it. This feels like one of those times. But overall, I'm very much a big fan of this.
Yeah, and I also want to throw out there that like we talked about, we sort of like skimmed over it earlier, right? But like the self-mill stuff with the Cephalid breakfast combo, right? Like for anyone who's ever done the Hermit Druid stuff historically, right? Like one of the problems you always run into is like you can have your Dread Return in hand or whatever, right? Like that. There's a lot of nice redundancy in the deck. If you draw your Thoracle, you just play it, right? If you draw your Dread Return, you can play Chthonian to reanimate your stuff, right? You can also like just have an Underworld Breach in your hand, right? And it can just be mill my entire deck, resolve this breach, right? You can also use the Savines that you're using for your intuition piles to then flash back your Underworld Breach if something else goes wrong, right? So like there's just so many ways that like that part is insulated, but in all of those cards that I just mentioned, the only card that's kind of dead is the Dread Return, and the rest of it was shit we're gonna play anyways.
It's so funny because like I have looked at this deck and gone, can I put a Hermit Druid in this multiple times? And because I've just looked at it enough times where I'm just like, I don't know, man. Hermit Druid just feels so free. And I'm just like,
it's like close. I do really think it's very, very close. Yeah, that's like
that's the thing, right?
Really
it's like we're already playing Greaves, and I'm like, all right, well, we're already playing that, and we have Savines Wreck, and then we have Chthonian Nightmare, and it's just like, sure have a lot of stuff that just like lets this just win, huh?
It's a really funny card that we have memed on that we didn't even bring up for this deck. If you are ever doing a Hermit Druid version of this deck, you need to play Need for Speed.
Riders of the Storm.
Yeah, for those who haven't understood where we're going with this, watch my Narset deck tech on my channel. But Need for Speed, unironically, is a 1-mana sack-a-land trigger Nadu that also gives haste to your Hermit Druid, that also gives haste to your Najeela game plan.
And it also triggers your Nadu.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Oh, this is a thing that I think is a weird interaction that before we kind of wrap up, I kind of want to point out is Grim Hireling can also trigger your Nadu because guess what? You don't have to sacrifice treasures when you do this.
Yep. Yes, you can proceed to play black for X amount of creatures, just saying that I'm going to sack 0 treasures and go, cool, black Nadu trigger, black Nadu trigger, black Nadu trigger.
We were looking at it and Phoenix pointed this out to us, and you and I both immediately were just like, excuse me, what?
Yeah, it's like, it's perhaps the dumbest combo in the whole deck, but it's very funny.
There and it works, and we're just kind of like, I mean, okay.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, no, I honestly, if I were going to cut a card for a land, I'd probably cut Professional Facebreaker. The more I'm thinking about it, just because I think that I would rather.
That's super valid.
I just think that would probably be a general improvement.
But
for
me, I'm like, I think the ones we've already highlighted today, right? Like, so I'm going to look at what the deck looks like, sans Spellseeker, sans Facebreaker, sans Neoform, right? Because that was one that I literally, before this episode, that package was out, I put it back in. That package was out, I put it back in. Like, and so this is obviously
you could cut all 3 of them and just put in 3 lands, and it would be perfectly defensible.
While I technically do believe you are correct there, I do want like one more piece of interaction, right? I'm thinking like specifically since we're just on the topic, right? Like my instinct right now is to go land, Sylvan Safekeeper, and then either some sort of card draw or the thing is, I don't want to lose the aspect of this deck that is just like, hey, and this is why Facebreaker is like maybe not the most out for me, right? Because like I want stuff that keeps our game plan churning, right? I want stuff that keeps pushing us forward, right? I've looked at what this deck looks like with, as I mentioned, like Mystical Tutor and Born and like stuff like that, which is just, I don't think it's it,
Yeah, I don't know that Born layers the way I want it to.
It's not a Born deck. Yeah, I agree. Like it's, Born's much better in like the Rog's Eyes or the Timnacroms and stuff like that. Like I would rather have the Final Fortune here, right? Like I'd rather be able to like, okay, I'm going to go take my extra turn. And that way, when I go from it on my next turn, right? Like I want to be able to be like, Cutzel into Final Fortune or like, that kind of stuff. Like that's the stuff that feels much more Najeela to me. And honestly, maybe there's a world where I'm just saying like, we also add Grand Abolition, right? Like if we're going to go for the 3 cuts, that it
also perfectly defensible.
It's not the craziest choice.
I think where I'm probably going to start is I feel like my initial thought is, okay, let's go up to 29 lands. Let's cut PFB and then like TBH. I don't love Rite of Flame here. I get why we're playing it, but it's my history of not liking Rite of Flame is long and storied.
Long recorded for sure. I will say this is one of the worst Rite of Flame decks, but you have Najeela in the command zone, so it sort of makes it digestible, but counter argument, we just talked about how shit Najeela is, so this game plan, so like it's all so complicated. I love this deck, but it's so messy.
And that's honestly the thing where like that's just kind of the reality of like layered Najeela decks in general is like layered Najeela decks are like you got to kind of keep tweaking it, and then once you find it, you're gonna find it and it's gonna rock. But it's just like you got to tweak it a little bit, and it's just I love layered Najeela. I don't like the NBC Najeela because it's really just not my style. I don't like having those 2 disparate plans. I really tend to like decks that have that like consistent internal logic, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
But and that's not shade on the NBC card or deck for what it's worth. Like I think that there's,
I mean, you mentioned it is a preference, right?
It's very much a preference thing, and like I think a great example of that is like my feelings on Meme Bet, right? Like it's I am not throwing shade at Meme Bet itself. It's I have a preference on the cards that I like to play, and this is not one of those cards. That's what I think. Anyhow, Ian, if people want to get some help with their decks and, somebody who might be ranked first in the world, where could they, well, at least ranked first in America, where could people potentially Find that.
Can you open your full mouth? Can you
No,
just?
I think I'd rather talk like
Yeah, if you
see,
want to
I'd
get some.
rather talk like a 30s gangster. See,
Hi, everybody. If you would like to find out more about CEDH coaching, if you want to find me over on Twitter or Instagram, that's at Comedian MTG or Comedian_MTG over on Discord, or you can find me on my Discord or the coaching Discord I have. Blah, 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 blah. There's a million places to find me. If you want to check out CEDH coaching, there's gameplay coaching where I sit down with you and other people and watch you guys play games and take notes and give you feedback. Or there is just one-on-one coaching where we do deck help, politics discussions, all of the other stuff that involves and taking your game to the next level. Find me any of those places. I'll get you rates and types and all that stuff.
yeah, best CEDH deck player in the West or whatever. I don't know.
Not even in the West.
Yeah, I know. You're like on the most East.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's cannot speak highly enough of this little twink over here. So
well,
with that being said, make sure you subscribe. We are over 9,000 subscribers now and rapidly approaching 10,000 subscribers. So if you could hit that subscribe button, that would be super rad of you. Not just rad, it would be super rad. And also, if you want to come to the Discord party, you can go over to patreon.com/the Mind Sculptors and support us there. And that is a great way that if you want to, play a little bit of Crusader Kings 3 with me, that's a great place to do it because, I'm playing that game. I've recently gotten over 1,000 hours logged in that game.
Jesus Christ.
The game's been out for like several years, but like still, it's I don't even know how many weeks of my life that is that I've just played that game.
Oh my God. All right, let's do the math. All right, wait. How many hours in a week? Okay, there are 168 hours in a week, so that's so let's close to like 8 weeks. 7 weeks, I guess, right? Yeah,
something like that.
7 is 1176.
Work hours.
6 is 1008. So 6 weeks.
6 weeks of my time. Because we definitely crossed over 1,008 hours. Just gotta be real. So 6 weeks of my life has been spent playing Crusader Kings 3.
6 sleepless weeks, I want to point out. six sleepless, no sleep at all weeks.
It's funny because I don't sleep a lot when I'm playing that game because I will lose track of time and it will be like 4 a.m. I'm like, oh shit. With that being said, thank you everybody for watching this podcast. We really appreciate everybody, and like truly 4 years ago you would have told me that this is what my life is making magic content and working on magic content and doing all of that for my job. I would have laughed in your face, but thank you everybody for helping make that a reality. It is a dream come true. So but with that being said,
also, past Callahan, a little rude.
What? Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I said past Callahan was a little rude, laughing in your face.
Well, yeah, past Callahan was a little rude, just as what it is. But with that being said, we will see you all next week. And I'm Cal.
I'm Ian.
Stay sculpty, everybody.